Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, Antoine, how you doing?
Good.
Okay. City planning, is everybody here that you need here so we could get started? Yes? Okay.
Yeah, we have everyone we need to get started.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I am officially going to call the June meeting to order. Thank you, everybody, for attending. If we could please start with the Pledge of Allegiance, if we can just all rise and say the pledge. I have my handy dandy flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, go ahead, Rosie. Yes.
Okay, so first we will start with attendance. Okay, so CB1, CB2, okay, CB3 I see. Okay, we have Councilmember Hanks's office, Councilmember Carr's office, and Councilmember Borelli's office. Okay, so it looks like everybody is here. If the board members can just take a look at the minutes, Brooke was kind enough to send everybody a copy of last month's minutes. And if I could just entertain a motion to accept the minutes, please.
Motion to accept.
Jerry first, can I have a second, please? Second?
Second, please.
Since Jerry
Okay,
seconded,
thank
am I
you,
allowed
Elena.
a second?
Okay, so, we have a few people on the agenda today, so I'm not gonna, we'll keep all the other housekeeping stuff until the end of the meeting. So, with no further ado, the Department of City Planning is here to discuss, carbon neutrality. So I turn over the floor to City Planning.
Great. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. It's really nice to be able to be here and present on City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality. My name is Niles Klingel. I'm a planner in the zoning division in the central office at New York City Planning. And I'm joined by a number of other folks from the city planning team. You all know George. He needs no introduction to all of you, as well as our Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, Danielle DeServo, and our Senior Director of Community Outreach and Engagement, Laura Marida. And Rasika Diastali from the Staten Island Office of Apologies, Rasika. I'm sure you all know from the Staten Island Office of Apologies, Rasika.
Welcome.
I'm sure you all know at this point as well. Thank you. I'm just going to pull up my screen really quickly. Is everyone on the board able to see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Right, so yes, I'm very excited to be able to present to you on some of the department's research and work leading to the City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality proposal, which is an opportunity to update our zoning regulations to help all of us throughout the city meet the city's climate goals.
Wow.
The City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality is the first of 3 projects that the Department of City Planning is developing as part of Mayor Adams' broader push, City of Yes. This initiative is charging agencies to take a hard look at outdated regulations, holding New Yorkers back from making investments in their homes, businesses, and in our city overall. 2 other initiatives, City of Yes for Economic Opportunity in the middle here, and City of Yes for Housing Opportunity on the right, will begin more public engagement later this summer. I want to just underscore these are all 3, while they are City of Yes, all 3 are distinct proposals. They are distinct research streams. They will lead to 3 distinct citywide zoning text amendments that will be filed as distinct applications. In order to avoid inundating the board with public review, in order to avoid inundating community members and the public during the public review process, we are not releasing all 3 of these. Community members and the public during the public review process, we are not releasing all 3 of these at the same time. They're going to be staggered throughout this year and into next year. So there can be a staggered review process of each proposal independently. On City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality, why are we doing City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality first? We've been researching sustainability related issues for Yes for Carbon Neutrality first. We've been researching sustainability related issues for several years since Zone Green in 2012, and I'll talk a little bit about Zone Green in a few slides. And with this foundation in place, we believe that we are ready to advance this work first out of all 3 of the research streams. Additionally, many of the elements of this proposal are urgently needed. They will deliver zoning relief to home and building needed. They will deliver zoning relief to home and building owners who are trying to make smart retrofit projects to cut their energy costs and to help the environment, but to date have been prevented from doing so because of zoning. Finally, City of Yes for carbon neutrality is not the last word on sustainability. Sustainable practices are, of course, deeply embedded in our planning work. They have been for decades, and they will continue to be present in all of the department's planning projects, including and especially City of Yes for economic opportunity and City of Yes for housing opportunity. I feel like this introduction is almost not needed on a day like today, but as we all know, I just want to frame the conversation. We are in a climate emergency, and that climate emergency is caused by greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon dioxide makes up the vast majority of those greenhouse gas emissions, and in the United States' greenhouse gas emissions in 2019, 80% of those emissions were from carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide generally comes from human activity, so that's specifically the combustion of fossil fuels. Think diesel, gasoline, natural gas, home heating oil. And in 2016, the world community joined together to sign the Paris Agreement, which is a vision to curtail human greenhouse gas emissions in order to limit overall global warming to no more than 2 degrees Celsius. And to do that in order to prevent further climate change and the disastrous consequences that come with climate change. Now, here in New York City, we've been implementing that vision in a number of ways through a number of initiatives under the umbrella of achieving carbon in a number of ways. Through a number of initiatives, neutrality by reducing the city's emissions 80% by 2050. So that is called 20 by 50, or 80, excuse me, 80 by 50 for short. And I'll talk about 80 by 50 elsewhere in the presentation. I also want to just do a little bit of level setting before we get into the zoning. What are we talking about at the department when we're talking about a carbon neutral city? It's a city where we focused on reducing, first and foremost, our operational carbon emissions. Those are the carbon emissions we release every day to run the city, to heat our homes, to run our vehicles, and to do that in line with the Paris Agreement. So it's a city where we've first reduced our overall energy needs through efficiency. That's the first pillar here. And to do this, we'll need to retrofit essentially every building in the city to become highly efficient and reduce wasted energy. A lot of the energy that we put into our city every day to cool and heat it actually gets wasted, and that cannot be the case going forward. Second, it's a city where we've cleaned the grid, the energy grid. We've decarbonized the source of electricity by switching from fossil fuel powered electricity to renewables like solar and wind. And third, from fossil fuel powered electricity to renewables like solar and wind. And third, a carbon neutral city is a city where we've electrified all of the remaining energy needs. So at every building and in every vehicle, shifting from fossil fuels to electric systems that run off of that clean energy grid. And as you can see on this chart in the right, from New York City's roadmap to 80 by 50, the drawdown in carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions from 2005 to 2050, gas emissions from 2005 to 2050, buildings make up the large majority of our city's carbon emissions. And zoning, of course, plays a key role in regulating buildings. And so it's essential to get our zoning resolution doing everything. It's essential to get our zoning resolution doing everything we can to support these. Now, when it comes to our research on carbon neutrality, we're building on a very strong foundation. 10 years ago, the department issued zone green. 10 years ago, the department issued zone of our zoning to support emerging green technologies, like of our zoning to support emerging green. But we were dipping our toe in the water here, and we could have and must now go further. In some ways, you can think of the research that's leading to the project I'm presenting this evening as a sort of follow-up to Zone Green, a sort of Zone Green 2, a chance to revisit it after 10 years, to update it, and to adjust it in light of the many technological and legal changes that have occurred since. And these include, since 2016 in particular, the focus on decarbonization coming from the Paris Agreement and 80 by 50. But they also include feedback we've received from homeowners, building owners, architects, engineers, practitioners, advocates, all giving us a feedback on Zone Green and how it's been working over the last 10 years and how we can make it better. This is exemplified on this slide by this cover from the report of the Urban Green Council in 2018 called Zone Greener, which called on the department to do more and go further when it came to Zone Green. This also includes updating the zoning to reflect the Climate Mobilization Act at the city level and the state's Community Leadership and Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA, at the state level. The city level Climate Mobilization Act, it's Local Law 97, which will impose fines on large buildings that do not cut their carbon emissions. That needs to be recognized in our zoning framework. And also at the state level, the state's ambitious solar and storage targets for New York City. Now, taking all of this, leads to the project that's before the board tonight, the City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality, which will respond to this climate crisis by removing zoning impediments to carbon neutrality, which will respond to this climate crisis by removing zoning impediments that urgently needed retrofitting work to solar arrays, energy storage, and electric vehicle chargers.
Nihilus,
Development on this proposal began in March.
Nihilus, can you, I think it might be a little choppy. Sometimes I think that might happen because I'm not sure. I think turning the camera off might help, but it seems like you're a little
If
choppy.
his
in the
cell
audio.
phone, if his cell phone is near him, that happens.
Ah, okay. We'll try moving the cell phone and
Yeah.
maybe
Apologies.
turning yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'd be glad to turn my camera off.
We'll see if that helps. Yeah. I think we're getting most of it. It's just speeding up and slowing down a little bit.
Oh, thanks for saying something. I appreciate it. So development of this proposal began in March when Mayor Adams announced his vision for a city of yes. Since last March, last March, March 2022. Since last March, we've conducted extensive outreach, and in particular with practitioners and other subject matter experts to help us here at the Department of City and other subject matter experts to help ensure this proposal will be helpful to those who are trying to add solar, EV chargers, or heat pumps to their homes and businesses. Now, DCP is sometimes criticized for not sharing enough information about what we're working on until it's in the public review process, which is the point in the process we're at right now. But to make good on our promise to do better, we have held 4 open to the public info sessions on the latest state of the research as it stood, 2 in October of last year, 2 in March of this year, and to those info sessions, our chair, Dan Grodnick, invited all community board chairs and encouraged them to share that information with for those events with their boards and their other constituents. Also in March of this year, City Planning partnered with the Urban Green Council, a recognized leader in climate work in New York City, to convene a group of technical and policy experts to review an initial draft of the proposal to validate the climate goals we were trying to support, as well as the solutions that we will be proposing to put forward. Is the choppiness any better?
Yeah, it's a little bit better.
Okay. So along the way in developing this proposal, we've been asking experts, nonprofit leaders, advocates, what do you need to do to help achieve these larger climate goals? And as you are pursuing whatever it is that you need to do, how has zoning, of all things, gotten in your way, impeded your efforts, or how has it helped? And how could we go further to help? Meeting the challenge of our climate crisis is absolutely a massive undertaking. And through our engagement over the last year, we've identified a number of ways that zoning can help support that effort. So tonight, we'll review the 4 key goals of decarbonization as already established in the city's climate policy, and how this proposal seeks to support those goals through 17 specific zoning changes that we've identified. So I will start. We've broken up the presentation into 4 distinct sections related to energy, buildings, transportation, and waste. At the beginning of each one, I'm going to talk a little bit about the broader context here. So everything depicted on this slide is not part of the zoning text amendment or the application that's before the board. It's really important to emphasize, this is all the context within which we're working. This is the existing landscape when it comes to climate policies and legislation at the federal, state, and city level. So the first highlight there that I want to touch on is the fact that by 2040, New York State, all of New York State, is legally required to achieve a 100% renewably based energy grid, and that's pursuant to that 2019 CLCPA. To support this, the state and the city supporting that will be developing large amounts of offshore wind and bringing in more clean hydroelectric power from upstate in Canada. However, this transition will need an all-hands-on-deck approach. This includes putting all of our rooftops to work, generating energy across the city. To give you a sense of where we stand with regards to rooftop solar specifically, a little bit of a status update. In 2016, the city set a goal of getting 1,000 megawatts. In 2016, the 6 rooftop solar across the city by 2030. So a little distinct from our 2050 goal. 1,000 megawatts is a sizable amount of energy, not anywhere close to even a quarter of the city's energy needs, but a sizable contribution. And to date, within that 1,000 megawatt goal, we're currently at around 300 to 400 megawatts of solar deployed all through history through to today. So this means that we have 7 years to, by some estimates, more than double or maybe even triple the amount of solar in New York City in order to meet that goal. It's a very short timeline of solar in New York City in order to meet that goal, a lot of solar. To utilize the energy from offshore wind, as well as from these rooftop solar installations, our energy grid will have to become smarter and more decentralized, with resources spread throughout the city instead of limited to utility sites in outlying areas. And to support this smarter, more decentralized grid, we as a city will need to rely on energy storage, which is essentially large batteries acting as the glue that holds this grid of the future together. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's the glue that holds this grid of the future together, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So given that context, I will now zoom in to the 5 specific zoning changes that the department has identified. These are improvements that we can make to help support those goals. These are part of the application that's before the board. And I want to emphasize that with these 5 changes, and really with all the changes I'll be talking about tonight, there are no new mandates. There are no new requirements that we are imposing. All of the changes here, the zoning changes here, are allowances and flexibility to support people undertaking retrofits, undertaking solar installations, undertaking EV charger installation projects. We're really trying to get zoning as far out of the way as is responsible and appropriate in order to enable people to do these types of projects quickly and expediently and as inexpensively as possible too. So given that, first I want to take a fresh look at our I want to dive in and talk about the zoning proposals. So first piece of the proposal relates to rooftop solar. Now first, we at the department and in our zoning can take a fresh look at our rooftop zoning allowances to ensure that there aren't any limitations holding us back from our solar goals, including the one I mentioned before. In many zoning districts, for example, there are current limits on the amount of rooftop that can be covered by solar canopies. And this proposal will update those rules to ensure that a roof can be completely covered by solar. Second, we need to take a similar approach for all of our city's 8,000 plus acres of open parking areas, ensuring that zoning is updated to never stand in the way of a solar canopy installed over a parking lot. That's not always the case today. Third, if you want to generate clean energy for utility customers elsewhere in your neighborhood through the community solar program, which was recently enabled through state legislation and Con Edison programs, zoning considers that a commercial use. But we need to recognize that there are large, for example, use. But we need to recognize residential campuses, hospitals, schools, colleges, all located in residential districts where community solar would be a great fit, but where commercial uses themselves are not allowed. Where commercial uses themselves are not allowed. Zoning needs to be updated to allow for community solar in these contexts. Fourth, we'll need to ensure that safe, FDNY and DOB reviewed and approved storage facilities are located where they are needed most. Now, energy storage is currently not allowed in the residence districts where customers need access to clean and renewable energy. Zoning needs districts where customers need access to clean needs to be updated to add specific rules for energy storage and to help facilitate its rollout across the city. And finally, facilitate its rollout across the city. Strict limits in today's zoning without a relief valve for sites where greater heights may be appropriate. The zoning proposal will create a new tool that could be used by future applicants to submit onshore wind facilities for a public review process coming before the City Planning Commission. To be clear, this review process coming before the City Planning Commission. To be clear, this proposal itself, City of Yes for carbon neutrality, what's before the board tonight, does not change anything with regards to current height restrictions or where turbines are or are not allowed. It simply spells out for the first time a clear process by which future applicants could pursue a discretionary approval for onshore wind. Currently, there is no path forward. Now let's
Niles,
go back. Yes.
seems like we have a hand up, and I was also going to suggest if we break at goal 1 so people can engage with some questions. Frank, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to bring something out. I mean, I have a lot of questions about what's being presented, but my first one's going to go to rooftops. I mean, you're talking about 100% coverage on a roof. Are you talking about any setbacks from the roof's edge for these things?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. That's a great question. So for for building rooftops, the current rules are, and I have a more detailed slide I could pull up. George, let me know if you think that would be helpful. But basically, the way that current rules work is that there's a height limit, a coverage cap, and a setback on the highest portion of any given building roof. In addition, most districts in the city, and really this is more germane to medium and high density districts that result in flat roofed buildings. So this is not really as relevant to a lower density pitched roof environment. In large and mid and higher density districts, contextual setbacks are required with base heights. So you have a building that rises a certain number of stories, it sets back, and then it continues to rise from there. So I just bring that up because I want to focus for a moment on that contextual setback and say that in that area, that contextual setback area today, as well as in this proposal, there would be no changes, no increased allowance for solar canopies in that area. They are not allowed in that area today or in the proposal. Now, zooming up higher to the highest building rooftop, again, this is for flat roofed buildings. There is that maximum height limit, coverage, and setback. This proposal would preserve the maximum height limit in most districts. There would still be a height limit in all districts. Obviously, there's a wide range of districts. There's low, medium, high residential districts, commercial and manufacturing. But the two elements of this proposal that are really essential are removing a coverage cap. So currently you can't exceed 25% of your roof area.
Mhm.
This proposal would expand that to 100% so as not to artificially limit how much of a roof someone could install solar panels on. And it would artificially limit how much of a roof someone could install solar panels on. And it would eliminate the setback from the street wall, which is 6 feet. And that is to align with the fact that the contextual setback in the street. And that is the thing that we've, through our analysis, have really focused on as the thing that needs to be preserved in order to prevent visual impacts in medium and high density districts. So hopefully that helps explain.
So you're saying in a case like this, there would be no setback, am I correct?
On the highest portion of the building roof, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I question the wisdom of doing that from point of view of safety, and besides that, aesthetics. It doesn't affect our district too much, but I question it. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. And thanks for bringing that up. And of course, I just want to emphasize, the part of the public review process here is precisely to get that kind of feedback. And please, when it comes to making recommendations to the City Planning Commission, to the department, please be sure to include recommendations like that. George, do you want to do moderating on the Q&A, or shall I take the next question?
No, I can, I'll also moderate, and then I'll also do screen share, because it seems like not screen sharing has helped your connection. So
Okay.
thanks for that comment and feedback, Frank. Charlene, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just want him to elaborate on what it would look like in a residential area. He talks about,
Mhm.
larger buildings, R4s, R5s, and so forth. What does it look like in a residential R32, R31? Explain that so that everybody's clear as to what it will look like in Staten Island neighborhoods.
Thank you, George, for pointing that up. So yeah, there are two different elements here. There's the flat roof proposal, and there is the pitched roof proposal. So currently for pitched roof buildings, oh, George, we lost the tab.
You lost the tab?
Yeah, the tab with the visual on it.
Oops, sorry about that.
Great, thanks. So currently in pitched roof districts, above the zoning height limit, which as we all know is a pitched zoning envelope to encourage more pitched roof buildings, above that zoning height limit, current rules allow 18 inches of thickness of solar panel installations. It's fine if you're proposing a system that is going to hug the level of the roof. It's going to be flat on that roof surface. But that is the ideal installation scenario for a perfect south-facing roof. That's often not the case. Buildings have southeast or northeast or northern exposures and aren't able to capitalize on an optimal solar exposure. So the strategy that solar installers rely on in those cases is to actually tilt the solar panel to get a better solar orientation. And in that case, often run up against zoning limitations because we only allow 18 inches above that zoning height limit. So after looking at a number of different arrangements for solar panels on roofs, we're proposing to expand that 18 inches to 60 inches to capture a wide range of flat roof, pitched roof solar installation typologies. And that is illustrated in, we got your email again, George, sorry. That is illustrated on the slide right before this one.
Okay, let me go back to apologies. Is it there?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
So that is sort of a visual depiction of what we're talking about. So the height is measured perpendicular to the roof surface. So what we're talking about. So the height is measured. You know, you have your roof angle, and then 90 degrees out from that, you measure out 60 inches, which is also 5 feet. That is the maximum extent to which an angled solar panel would be. That is the maximum extent to which an angle in the proposal.
Okay, thanks for clarifying, but just so that everybody understands, 5 feet up from the roof line, and it may cause water runoff, shadows for neighbors, depending upon the height of the adjacent buildings. I think this has to be edited. It has to be made real time for residential, not in line with the R4s and 5s. Homes on Staten Island are majority what we're looking at here, and single dwelling homes, okay? And some of the buildings are close to each other, so I think this has to be amended so that it's not a general statement for all. Residential, commercial, whatever. It has to be clarified, it has to be toned down, and there has to be boundaries set for, you know, R1 and 2s, you know, R3Xs.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. We hear that, and in our last discussion on this, you know, one thing that you had suggested, I think Frank has suggested as well, is you know, adding some sort of control to ensure that these things don't go above the peak, the roof peak
Right.
itself. I think that that's a really good proposal and something that I don't see why we couldn't add. I don't know, George, if there's anything else we should add on here.
All right. Cool.
I don't think so, because as long as that sort of modification is aligns with the goal of the proposal and still achieves the intent of carbon neutrality, I think putting a maximum at the peak could be feasible. It could be per zoning district, R1, R2. It could be per special district. It could be LDGMA specific. So I think there's a lot of different
It
ways
needs
to do this.
controls.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right.
okay. Thank you.
Let me
Thank you.
stop sharing just to go to a PDF version, which is going to be easier, and I'll reshare in 1 second. Any other questions about the first 5? Let's see. Let's see. Do you see the presentation?
We do.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go back to goal 1. Any other questions? Okay. So should we move on to goal 2?
Let's do it. Thanks, George. So the second goal that the existing city climate policy emphasizes when it comes to carbon neutrality, and which we at the Department of City Planning are trying to support with our neutrality, and which we at the Department of City Planning are trying to support with our zoning proposal, is decarbonizing our building stock. And as you recall from that chart at the beginning of the slideshow, our buildings are by far the biggest source of our carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. So it's essential to make improvements here. To decarbonize our building stock, ultimately, we're looking at, and I realize this is big and this is a long-term project, right? This is not going to happen overnight, this year, or even this decade, but every one of our cities, million plus existing buildings will need to be retrofit in some way, shape, or form. That is essential to improving energy efficiency and achieving electrification. That is going to involve things like you can see depicted here, retiring oil and gas powered furnaces and boilers when they reach their end of life and replacing them with new highly efficient electric systems. Geothermal heat pumps can obtain, some people call it a 300% efficiency because of by drawing heat from the atmosphere or from the ground, it pulls in more thermal heat than the energy used to obtain that heat. So there are highly efficient ways to heat and cool our homes out there, and that is the long-term trajectory here. Now, the other piece of this is efficiency, and really chronologically is the first thing we need to achieve. Our buildings need to become a lot more efficient. They need to have heavier sweaters on them, essentially keeping the heat and cool inside. I want to touch on here also within this broader context. Again, these are not elements of the zoning text proposal before the board tonight, but this is the context that we're working within here. There are two key laws here that have applicability in a lot of other parts of the city, less so in Staten Island, but I do want to note them here. So for large buildings, and which are defined as 25,000 square feet and larger, Local Law 97, which is a local law part of the Climate Mobilization Act passed by the City Council in 2019, will begin to impose fines on those large buildings, those 25,000 square foot and up buildings, if they do not cut their carbon emissions. Fines will begin in 2025 based on building performance measured throughout 2024 and will increase gradually through 2050. Second, Local Law 154 of 2021, passed by the City Council in 2021, requires that all newly constructed buildings are electric from the get-go. So fossil fuel-based equipment will not be allowed in new construction going forward. It is, of course, allowed to remain and continue in existing buildings. So those are two things that are going to be shaping and guiding the trajectory going forward, and in particular, Local Law 97 for large buildings, not applicable to single and two-family homeowners. But on the next slide, the zoning proposal here to support and recognize those changes that are already occurring outside of zoning are things that can benefit single or two-family homeowners just as much as they can benefit large buildings affected by Local Law 97. So this proposal doesn't limit or maintain or keep all of these keep all of these allowance and flexibility and assistance limited only to Local Law 97 buildings. It makes all building owners and homeowners eligible to use these proposals. So the first relates to electrification retrofits, and this is where you're, say, retiring a boiler and replacing it with a heat pump. Oftentimes that's going to have to be on top of your building or otherwise outside because it can't be in the basement. It needs to be close to the atmosphere where it can expel or pull in heat. Zoning can accommodate the increasing need for this outdoor equipment and allow for it to be located above the zoning height limit and allow for it to be located above the zoning height limit on building rooftops. By getting zoning out of the way here, lessening the degree to which zoning is impeding progress here will give homeowners, architects, and engineers greater flexibility to navigate their unique particular best path to electrification. Second, zoning needs a particular best path to electrification. Second, zoning needs to ensure that where someone is trying to add thicker insulation, or even in some cases, in the case of large buildings in particular, reclad the whole building by removing a really old and low-performing facade and replacing it with a new efficient one. Not really something you'll see for timber frame single and two-family homes, but in those cases, we want to ensure that, as well as cases where people are just adding insulation to their existing home on the exterior, we want to make sure they're not running into zoning obstacles that prevent them from undertaking that project. We want to make sure that they're not running into zoning obstacles that prevent them from undertaking the project. Third, we need to update an existing incentive, the 2012 zone green wall thickness deduction, which we've heard from architects has been really helpful and really popular. It ensures that buildings are higher performance, better than energy code even requires. This incentive awards a small amount of additional floor area for better than code buildings. We need to ensure that it is updated to reflect the later than code buildings. We need to ensure G code and best practices for the future. And finally, I just want to mention here, when it comes to building retrofitting cost, undertaking this work will not be free. The good news is that there are billions of dollars at the federal, state, and city level available to support it. That includes low interest financing, but that also includes available to support it. That includes low interest financing, but that also includes grants, tax abatements, and tax exemptions. The New York City Accelerator is a program that's run out of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice and can help connect home and business owners who are looking at these types of retrofits, trying to figure out their path forward. It can connect you with technical and financial support. So before starting any project, give them a call. Accelerator.nyc is the web address. If you've been in touch with the Accelerator in the past, get in touch again, because there is just so much opportunity here coming through recent federal and state changes, including the recent passage at the state level of the Environmental Bond Act. So there is a lot available to support this kind of work. Do we want to pause here and talk about building questions?
Yes, thanks. Any questions, Frank?
Yeah, I just want to say something. The fact that you're allowing the retrofitting of exterior, changing the facade of a building and increasing it, and that it will not affect the FAR is a good thing. That's something I applaud. You know, however, what you're talking about in changing these buildings, changing the heating systems, the cooling systems, changing the windows, doing all these things, these are very expensive propositions. And we have a lot of buildings around New York City, garden apartments, buildings, apartment buildings that the people that are co-ops, condos, and we'll say for-profit buildings, that it's kind of like unaffordable. A friend of mine is on the board of directors of the Fountains. Everybody here is familiar with the Fountains if you live on Staten Island. And he said it, he goes, what they want us to do, he said, we would have to take out a new mortgage. He says, we have a lot of people on these two buildings who are on fixed incomes. He goes, they can't afford the increases that we're going to have to be charging them. So the cost is something that could be prohibitive. I mean, it sounds great and everything, but I think it's something that has to be looked at very carefully. And then if these people don't do it, they get hit with fines.
Right. I think that's something Nihilus mentioned, which is something that's separate and it is important. And I mean, the fact that you said your friend said they want us to change our systems might be the case for legislation that's been passed by other entities. They want us to, but this text amendment is allowing flexibility for people that choose to do something. This text amendment isn't a mandate. So what you said is true for, I believe, city council, state legislators, lawmakers, but this text amendment is allowing flexibility for people that want to do something, and they can get funding from the Accelerator app, like Nyla said, but they can't do it today because zoning says no. There is definitely a conversation that needs to happen for people that can't afford it and are forced to, but that's separate, a little bit independent.
Yeah, because as you said, some people people if don't do it will be fined. So right there, it's something that's forced.
That's part of local law 97, which is separate, right, Nihilus?
Yeah, absolutely. It is separate and distinct, and it's already on the books. It's not part of the zoning text amendment. But that said, Frank, I hear you. I've heard this that there are small buildings, particularly garden apartments, that are caught in local law 97, right? Because they are technically 25,000 square feet and up, but they are not anywhere near like a midtown office building. And I think that it's really key for the city to take a hard look at that. And that is something that is feedback that I already, since we talked about it, I think that was last week, I have been sharing and will continue to share and will continue to advocate for, just in my capacity as a planner, that we really need to tread carefully there. I also just want to, I hear you and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I hear you and I really appreciate that. There is also I want to talk a little bit about the climate. The chief climate officer of our city, Rit Agarwala, is the leading all of our city's environmental initiatives and decarbonization initiatives. And when he's talked about Local 987, which again, like George correctly pointed out, separate legislation, not part of this amendment, but when he's talking about it, he's always talking about it as part of the Climate Mobilization Act, not the Climate Penalty Act. The purpose of this law isn't to just slap fines on people with no hope of seeing improvements here. Though the goal at the end of the day is not fines. The goal at the end of the day is eliminating or reducing our carbon emissions. And the vision is to help people get further in that endeavor of reducing carbon emissions. So whenever I've heard the chief climate officer talking about this, he always emphasizes that those that building owners who are doing everything they can to figure out their path forward, talking to the accelerator, that's a key thing from the start, talking to engineers, trying to investigate what's possible and setting sort of a time frame to get there, even if it's not this year or next year or the following year, charting that path forward, that making that best faith effort will not be facing fines. So I just want to emphasize that too. And you know, I know that Local 987 is a distinct thing, but I know that this is all kind of integrated too. And Frank, I hear you, and I've heard the other concerns that your board's raised, others have raised elsewhere in the city.
And
and sharing it.
I think other officials in the city have also heard that, and I think we can maybe circulate the article and try and find it. But I think other officials have noted that garden apartments, like Frank said, might not be able to accommodate this, and I think there might. I can't speak on behalf of the legislative body of the city, but I think that we did see some movement or idea to exempt certain garden apartments. So it is being discussed citywide, and I'm glad that Staten Island's also recognizing it as a potential modification as well.
Thank you.
Please do include that in the resolution, that either that comes from the board or the borough board. Note that that's an issue, and we can continue to note that's an issue, and we can continue to emphasize that in all of our internal discussions too.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was a question. I just saw a thumbs up from Fred. I thought it was a hand. Thank you, Fred Ginta.
How are you?
All right, goal 3, Nihilus.
Beautiful. Let's do it.
I have a quick question for you.
Oh, okay, question, yes.
Yes. When all this comes to be and the equipment is needed to convert a building, will this equipment be available for the conversion? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I think I can
go
hear
ahead.
you. You're asking about like the commercial availability of like cold weather heat pumps and geothermal heat pumps.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. This is technology that's out there, and in fact is pretty battle tested at this stage. So it's available. There are practitioners in the city who know how to install it. It's not like a space age technology that we're experimenting with. People have been using cold weather heat pumps in northern contexts, much colder than New York, for years. So it's out there. It's available.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
Oh,
Can I just add to that?
who is it?
It's Charlene.
Oh.
It's not always cost effective to use the heat pumps. I had looked into geothermal in a home that we proposed building, okay? Extremely expensive. So I just wanted that out there. While it's good that we are moving this way, I agree with it,
Mhm.
okay? Something has to be done to assist or give an incentive for somebody to actually do this. It is probably 2 times the cost of a normal system in a typical home.
That's a good point.
It's a great point. Yeah, I'm trying to pull up a link really quickly. I'll add it in the chat. Just it's a resource from the New York State NYSERDA Energy Research and Development Authority that links to a lot of, particularly for geothermal, a lot of incentives that are out there that may have not been out there in the past. So I'm just going to pull that up and add it to the chat, unless someone from Staten Island office has it.
The
handy.
incentives are not great enough. I've looked into the incentives. They're not great enough. They are out there, but they're minimal. It has to be increased. I mean, this has to be looked at thoroughly, and it has to be tweaked. Like, we are moving forward, with the green. I agree with it, However, something has to be done for the relief of the homeowner and small businesses and places like that.
Right. And you're saying if a small business less than 25,000 square feet or a homeowner
Yeah,
wants to do it, they should be incentivized to do it.
yeah.
Right.
Just like the electric vehicles. Okay, they started out with the very big incentive and they're slowly going down, down and down. And
Right.
less vehicles are applicable to it.
Well, that's a good transition. Frank, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, just a
before you
quick comment
transition
on the
to
heat pumps.
electric vehicles?
Heat pumps work great. They really do. However, they're a supplementary heating system. When it's 10 degrees or 20 degrees outside, you're not going to get your house up to 65 or 70 degrees with a heat pump. You might get it up to 40 or 50 degrees. That's about the extent of it. Like I said, they're great, but very limited in scope. It's a supplementary system. That's all it is.
In the Northeast it is.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's where we are.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And as Charlene alluded to, there's also discussions around electric vehicles. So, can you see goal 3 on the slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. So on goal 3, decarbonizing vehicles, we know we know that decarbonizing our buildings is important. We know that decarbonizing the vehicles in our city is important too. It's important to know that decarbonizing. So we're this particular proposal is focused on supporting the decarbonization of private vehicles that everyday New Yorkers drive and own. That is our primary emphasis here. So the starting point, the context here is that there are currently 2 million private vehicles registered in New York City, and less than 1% of them, a tiny fraction actually of 1%, are zero emission currently. So New York City lags basically every other American metro in EV adoption. One of the biggest hurdles there is cost and availability. Absolutely. And federal and state incentives are relevant there. It's not something zoning can help with. But one thing that zoning does touch on is the question of where can you park and charge your EV? And that's certainly one of the biggest hurdles to achieving EV adoption in New York City. We're also projecting that there's going to be massive increase for charging needs in the city because by 2035, New York State and Albany has already indicated that starting in 2035 and going forward, all new vehicles sold in New York State must be zero emission vehicles, and that is largely going to be electric vehicles. So as we head towards 2035, we're going to see more and more EVs, and then from 2035 onwards, we're going to see a lot more EVs than that. It is going to be a long-term transition. Of course, the existing vehicles that are out there are going to continue to be allowed to be out there. New York State is not taking away people's internal combustion engine vehicles. New York State is not taking away people's internal combustion engine vehicles. On top of that, we know at city planning, a one-to-one transition from EVs, from internal combustion vehicles to EVs is not the solution. We need to promote greater usage of bicycles, e-micromobility, pedestrian trips, and mass transit usage. And we're trying in this project and all of our projects to promote greater walkability always. Next slide. So within that context that's already happening out there, I'm going to zoom in now and talk about some of the zoning changes that we've identified to help out here. So the first relates to sort of gas station type facilities, public EV charging facilities. Today, these are not allowed in C1 and C4 commercial districts. They're allowed in half of the city's commercial districts, generally the districts further away from where people live. Simple, straightforward piece of this proposal is to allow EV charging, public EV charging facilities that look something like a gas station of the future to locate in all commercial districts and all manufacturing districts citywide. Second, zoning can allow building owners to opt, and I emphasize opt, to designate a portion of their existing parking spaces to instead of to be offered as public EV charging spaces. So that is generally within the same footprint spaces. So that is generally within the same footprint of parking spaces that currently apply today across the city, where private building owner wants to take a certain number of their spaces in their parking facility and allow car share vehicles to locate there. It's been a popular program where folks have opted into it. Within that same rubric, more or less, we are proposing to allow either the car share program that exists today or public EV charging. Again, this is a optional allowance that zoning would in this proposal be offering, so that if someone wanted to designate an unused parking space to be used for public EV charging, they could do so without receiving a zoning violation. And of course, this is not going to be a one size fits all thing. There are going to be many buildings in the city where those spaces are needed. They are used. And in those cases, of course, those spaces should continue to be provided. Third, there's a wide range of complex zoning allowances and restrictions on commercial vehicles in non-residential facilities. So I'm talking public parking lots, public parking garages, and accessory commercial parking spaces. So those are the parking lots that serve office buildings, retail, shopping malls, etc. Those rules can all be streamlined to support more car sharing in those spaces, more car rental in those spaces, and commercial parking overnight where those spaces go unused because there are no patrons at a particular business or office workers in an office. Ensure that, for example, box truck fleets are able to park and in the future charge in those facilities too. Fourth, special rules currently only apply in Manhattan for automated parking facilities. These are generally underground robotic facilities where you drive your car onto a tray, you get out of the car, laser scans, no one's inside, and the tray takes the car and parks it in a underground parking facility. These are space efficient, they are electrifiable, and they reduce idling times as well as embodied carbon by using less material than a parking garage typically would. These rules are currently only reserved for the Manhattan core and a few other select geographies. We believe it's common sense to roll them out so that anyone citywide could opt to specify an automated parking facility. And finally, bike parking. We really need to add rules for storage and charging of bicycle parking. Allow bike parking facilities in commercial districts in particular. Zoning has very little that it touches on when it comes to bike parking. It assumes always we're talking about automobiles, and we need to recognize that people take trips by bike, and in order to encourage more people to take trips by bike, they need to have predictable places, generally in commercial districts, where they can park their bikes indoors securely. Why don't we pause there and take the transportation related questions?
Does Frank? Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the charging stations in parking lots. Let's make believe I own an apartment building, okay? And I'm required to have 100 parking spaces in this building, okay? According to this proposal, I think I would be able to take 20% of these spaces and make them into charging stations. Am I correct? I think that's the number, it's 20%.
Correct.
Okay, so now I contact one of these companies, I rent out 20% of my spots, which is 20 spots, and I rent them out to this guy. I'm making more money. It's a good deal for me. However, 20 spots have just been taken away from the residents who live in that particular building. Now, the zoning says that for a building a certain size, you're supposed to have a certain amount of parking spaces. Well, obviously, these parking spaces have not just been withdrawn from the people who live there. The public is going to be allowed to go in there and use it. So those could never be used as parking spaces. So basically, we're taking in this proposal, in many cases, our regulations on parking, required parking for commercial establishments. It could be, I don't know, it could be past ShopRite, for example. ShopRite's got a parking lot on the South Shore that's jammed full with cars all the time. It's got the required parking that the city requires, but it's jammed full with cars all the time. Now, we're going to take, I don't know, whatever it is, there might be 200 spots in there. We're going to take 40 of them in there and put them for charging stations, which they'd be allowed to do. And they'd be making money on it. Except now those cars are going to be all over the streets and people are going to be hiking their wagons to and from it. So basically looking at this thing, taking parking, this flexible position that you're taking is not something that I see is really working that well. Okay? All right, and this, so because of this, I do have a problem with this.
Right.
Okay, and many of us on CB3 do have a problem with it. We fight for parking all the time. in our residential facilities, in our commercial facilities, manufacturing, everything. We're constantly fighting for it. And now it's being taken away for charging stations. It's like suddenly in a commercial site, you're allowing the guy, the owner, to build more commercials, a commercial building on that site. Well, he's not building a building, he's just putting in charging stations, but it's got the same effect. It's making revenue for him and it's taking away parking for the community. And that's our concern.
I have a question.
Jerry?
Charge sharing, allow a percentage of residential spaces to be shared with the public. Does that mean someone who has a 4-car driveway can rent out a spot, or is this just commercial that you're talking about?
This is residential group parking facilities. So these are generally going to be larger multifamily parking facilities that serve, you know, a larger number of parking spaces. It's not going to be relevant to like a driveway serving a single or two-family house.
So if I have a 2-family house with 4 parking spots, I can't sell 2 or 3 of them?
This proposal, this zoning allowance doesn't apply in that context. So yes,
Okay, well, I think you better clarify that, because you got a lot of people out here going to look to make some money. I have people here who have driveways and they have their plugins and so on. If they realize they can make their money back by selling 1 or 2 spots in their driveway, that's a possibility too. Just bring it to your attention.
I appreciate that feedback, and as well as Frank's. I hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll make sure that's clarified because obviously if somebody has a Tesla charger in their driveway, they could put up a yard sign and say, you know, lemonade $1, charging $5. But we'll make it crystal clear that this only applies to what is called group parking facilities, which don't apply to 1-family and 2-family homes.
Thank you.
Charlene?
I think the suggestion on this would be moving forward on all new commercial construction, supermarkets, large, shopping plazas and stuff. They could have increased parking that would include electric vehicle charging. However, existing parking lots withdrawing regular parking spaces, I don't think that's beneficial for anyone.
Mm-hmm. Regular meaning,
In other words, grandfather, well, it's not even a grandfather, really. Its existing ones would not be permitted to use the 20%, but moving forward, any large renovation or new construction would be able to, I know South Shore, we're restricted for parking, so they would have to ask. Okay, but say if a project was allowed 125 spaces, you could probably give them an extra 25 spaces just for EV if they wanted it.
right. Nihilus, this is and that's a great point, Charlene, and it reminds me of a question that we couldn't answer last week, Nihilus. Are these spaces going to be restricted only for EV charging? Or can someone from the public park in there? And if it happens to be occupied by a petrol car, then the EV car has to go to another spot? Or is it going to be only reserved for EV charging? Or is it up to the private entity? Is it up to the private entity that sells it? Or
Really, at the end of the day, that's a great point. It's up to the private entity. And what we're trying to do here is get zoning a little bit out of the way for folks to make those decisions on their property themselves. Ultimately, though, I think if you're going to designate a parking space for public EV charging and you are going to invest in EV charging infrastructure, you're going to want to make sure that that's available to EVs. Of course, when you charge, you have to pay for that electricity, right? So if you install an EV charger and no one's charging there because that spot is always iced or occupied by someone else's internal combustion vehicle, it didn't make sense. So, mission not accomplished there. So I think that that's an important thing that the private entity, the building owner, the co-op board would want to make sure that it's really clear, and we'll work with DOB on signage and painting standards here, but that those spaces are dedicated to EV charger if the private entity, the building owner, the co-op board decides to even go this route in the first place.
right. Okay. Yeah, I could see it going both ways because if there's no sign and those spaces are occupied by petrol cars all the time, the owner's not making money. But since there is a fee being associated, it's highly unlikely that those spaces are going to be occupied at all hours of the day because someone's going to have to move at some point.
They will.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for explaining that. And good point, Charlene. I'm glad you raised that because it reminded me of the question from last week.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we can definitely, Charlene's suggestion is something we can take under advisement and think about how this can be best used in new developments going forward. So I appreciate that feedback.
I know we're at 5:01. I personally have a little bit more time left. If anybody else, I see some people in the chat are leaving, but I think we have time to continue. Nihilus, do you have a few more minutes?
I'm happy to stay on as long as we need to. Luckily, there's only one more goal and four very
Right.
straightforward changes left. So
I'd like to make
almost
one
there.
point on this.
Perfect.
Something that might consider also is, we have parking, we have required parking. Maybe the required parking, in other words, with the required parking, if they want to put in an EV station, that's in addition to the
Right.
required parking.
that's
In
what
other
I
words,
was
on
I
new
think that's
construction.
kind of what, yeah. That's kind
that's
of
what
what
I
Charlene
was
was
saying.
saying.
Yeah.
Understood.
And I think that it might be, I wonder how that would work, because I think it might be site specific. Last week when we spoke about Bricktown Center, I think maybe Tom Barlotta, CB3 chairman, was raising the point that the Michaels on the northwest quadrant of the resale pad is more busy, and the Target had swaths of asphalt that nobody literally parks in because it's very, very far. I think it's a football field and a half away from the store. So there might be some sites where it might be appropriate to use existing sites, but if it's a constrained site, food stores have high parking rates. Food stores are high in demand in parking. So maybe it's use specific, but that's a good point.
Yeah, it's a great point. And you know, when you see this happen, and it's generally happening in jurisdictions outside of New York City, there are always a few examples you can find where people make it work in New York City. But usually you see, whether it's Tesla or Electrify America or EVgo or Revel or one of these other companies, they're generally kind of getting that sort of like out of the way parking spaces that are otherwise going unused. And it's really that type of thing where there are unused spaces where obviously entities would have an interest in upcycling them, essentially making sure that they get used by
Right.
EV chargers. But it's a great point and great suggestions. Appreciate it.
Okay.
So on the fourth, thanks, George. Sorry. So finally, our last goal relates to reducing our city's stormwater and solid waste streams and helping eliminate the carbon emissions associated with both of those. So first, we can reduce stormwater runoff by promoting greater permeability on site. And this means less water that flows into the combined sewer flow to energy intensive treatment plants. Real common sense. Second, we can reduce the energy associated with hauling and processing garbage by reducing the amount. And some estimates say that there are 45% of our city's solid waste stream is organic material that doesn't need to go to the landfill in the first place. It can be retained and used within the city. Third, we can reduce the carbon emissions associated with our food by promoting more local food production on our city's rooftops. I'll get into that in a second. Next slide. So four specific zoning changes we've identified to support those goals are as follows. First, we need to clarify language in the zoning resolution regarding paving. So zoning does have language stipulating what type of paving is acceptable and what isn't. And it's a little ambiguous currently about whether permeable paving or porous paving is allowed. That needs to be tightened up so it's clear that zoning always allows permeable paving where it complies with building code, right? The structural requirements, et cetera, for holding vehicles. From a zoning perspective, if it's going to hold up a vehicle, zoning should not care whether it's permeable or impermeable. Second, zoning can update our we can update our zoning's street tree requirements to allow for new high performance street tree bed types. So currently zoning requires street trees to be planted when you have a new development. It assumes a standard tree bed, but there are new typologies, including connected tree beds, which are longer and hold multiple trees, as well as rain gardens, sometimes called bioswales. Our zoning can be updated to recognize these new typologies and allow for them. Third, our zoning resolution back in its print days was about 4,000 pages long and doesn't even mention today the words compost or recycling at any point. It's time to add specific rules to clarify where these uses are allowed as accessory uses, in very limited circumstances as a commercial use in a commercial establishment, and generally as a manufacturing use in a manufacturing district like you see pictured here, to help these sectors grow. And lastly, rooftop greenhouses. Rooftop greenhouses are, since zone green, allowed on top of non-residential buildings. But to build one, current rules require you to hire a land use attorney and come to the City Planning Commission and get a chair certification. That increases the cost and complexity and scares a lot of people away because over the last 11 years, we've only had 2 people actually try to do this. We think that by streamlining this requirement, we can allow DOB to review applications for building permits for structural integrity and things like that. But there isn't really a lot of a role for city planning to evaluate here, as long as the general requirements are followed, which DOB can evaluate. This will cut costs and simplify the process for those looking to add a rooftop exclusively for cultivation of plants on top of their flat-roofed non-residential buildings and help grow food in their community. Next slide. It will conclude our overview of the 17 specific zoning changes we've identified. I'm sure that this has been shared out broadly. If not, you can find it at our website, nyc.gov/yes carbon neutrality, all one word. These are the changes we've identified to help support the larger project of decarbonizing our city to keep it clean, healthy, and equitable for the years to come. On the next slide, I just want to touch quickly on where we are in the public review process. So as a citywide zoning text amendment, this process will continue for the next several months. All 59 community boards are concurrently reviewing this proposal with their borough boards, as we see tonight, and borough presidents. In July, on July 26th, the City Planning Commission will hold a public hearing. Everyone is welcome to come and testify or send in written testimony regarding these changes. The commission will take all of that under advisement, consider modifications, and on September 13th, we are tentatively scheduling the CPC vote, making modifications or adopting the proposal. That will then begin the city council review portion. So the text will go from the City Planning Commission to the city council, where the entire city council will be engaged in reviewing the proposal and ultimately and hopefully approving it. It will then become law in the fall. So just next slide is our thanks. Thanks to everyone for your attention, your thoughtful questions. Looking forward to more questions if we have time and if there's interest. And really appreciate everyone's time and interest. Thank you.
Frank, I think you've had your hand up maybe about a topic on the.
Yeah, I want to back all the way up because there was one area which which deserved to be hit hard on and we didn't. And that's going to be on where you're going to be allowing solar installations on a piece of property that's less than 10,000 square feet. Less than 10,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet is 100 by 100 piece of property. Okay, and we're going as of right. In other words, it wouldn't even have to come in front of the community board. And we're talking about solar arrays. We're talking about battery storage facilities. In other words, my piece of property is 60 by 120. I'd be able to sell my house under this proposal. Somebody will come in, knock the house down, put a battery storage facility right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Okay, I think that's something that is literally outrageous. On Littlefield Avenue and Highland Boulevard in Eltingville, we have a battery storage facility that just went up. It's in a commercially zoned area. It's right adjacent to semi-attached homes. I mean, there's the house, right next to it is the storage area. And you know, not for nothing, but in a commercial establishment, we want buffers of trees and shrubs and everything else. You don't even, there's no requirement here. There's nothing. House, battery storage operation. House, pretty big industrial use on the adjacent piece of property. And this proposal calls for this to go into residential neighborhoods. My opinion, outrageous. Outrageous and should not be. Okay? Another thing that you're talking about is a windmill, right? Okay, right now has to be 35 feet long high. You're talking about increasing this to 85 feet, putting them on the shore. The setback from somebody's property is 10 feet, width of a driveway. So people are going to have, who live on shore areas, are going to have these things right adjacent to their homes. Constant noise from it, a constant hum and everything else coming from these things all the time. I don't think these proposals have been thought out all that well, to be quite honest with you. I have a serious problem with these two particular issues. Okay, with that.
Yes.
Thank you, Frank.
Another thing I want to bring out is you're talking about having recycling in commercial areas or commercial areas with a residential overlay. So in other words, I'm walking down the street in Eltingville. One store decides that they're going to be a recycling center. Now, you guys know the bottle centers that the supermarkets have, they have it in a separate facility. They don't even keep it in the store because they smell and they're dirty. Now you're going to have all kinds of recycling going into this store. So as I'm walking by this thing, it's going to stink, it's going to smell. It's going to be a real great addition to a commercial district to allow something like that. I think this is totally not thought out at all. Quite a few of these things. So I'm just laying that all on your shoulders. I know it's a lot that I just threw in at the end, but there it is. Thank you.
No,
I
it's,
appreciate
it's
it. Sorry.
you saved the best for last.
Okay.
I think we've definitely talked about it before, and the screening requirements today require 4 feet, I believe. In the future, we're adding more screening requirements. So if there's an energy storage facility that does not have screening requirements today, call us, call DOB. They're supposed to. I know that 4 feet may not be enough. We can discuss increasing screening requirements for aesthetics. In terms of the safety of them, I'm not sure if Community Board 1's here anymore, but on May 6th, on May 9th, FDNY Joseph Harris, commander of Division 8, spoke to Community Board 1 and discussed the safety review process with the Hazmat Battalion for the, I believe, 35 battery storage facilities under review right now by FDNY. So Commander Joseph Harris discussed to Community Board 1. If Community Board 2 and Community Board 3 would like FDNY to come down and discuss how they review the 35 active applications, that would be great.
Yeah,
So
we
in
would
terms
like
of
that.
yeah,
We
in terms of
definitely would like that.
landscaping, okay, yeah, we'll reach out to Joseph Harris. In terms of landscaping, we can definitely increase that.
And I'm not talking about landscaping. I'm talking about the very idea of a battery storage operation being right next to houses, to homes where people live. Kids are going outside playing in the backyard, having that next door.
Right.
It just doesn't fit.
Okay. Vince, I think you're on mute. But while Vince unmutes, Charlene, you have your hand up?
Yeah,
I
I
have-
just wanted to add and clarify for everybody else that's on this meeting. When you're saying C districts, it also includes overlays.
Mhm.
So in all of our small towns where we have apartments above, mom and pop stores, or in a mixed use situation, to have recycling outside is not a good idea.
You mean
So
like,
I think it has to be clarified. If it's a
Mm.
strictly C1, C2 issue, I don't have a problem with it. Just like the supermarkets have the recycling of the bottles. But to put it in a residential area, there's a place in Tottenville, a bagel store on the corner, okay, surrounded by residential homes. Nobody wants recycling in front of that store. So I think it has to be modified according
yeah,
to
I'm
its
not
use.
sure. I don't think it would be allowed to be in the right of way because that's not their property. Obviously
But even if it
residents.
was in the rear yard, George, it would be facing a residential home. Or on the
Yeah,
side of
yeah,
a building,
one-
it would be facing a residential home. It's
Once-
not good in an overlay situation.
One small clarification I'd like to add there is that the proposal clarifying when recycling is allowed in a commercial district requires it to be completely enclosed within a building, and of course would need to comply with health code, noise code, any sort of nuisance regulations. Nothing in this proposal is allowing in a commercial district unenclosed recycling. Just want to add that. There's also one thing I wanted to add about wind, but we could go back to that.
yeah. I can also stop sharing so we can see each other better. I think we've looked at all the slides enough.
Yeah.
Jerry and then Vince.
I mean, I'll get a fine if I put my garbage out before 8 o'clock in a plastic bag.
Thank you.
And now we're going to have recycling. God knows how this is all going to work. The issues that are being raised here, you're talking about carbon neutral, a clean environment, but no one's talking about what's the impact on the human beings who are paying the taxes and trying to live here throughout the city, regardless of neighborhood, community. economic, socio-status. We have to look at human beings, and it seems to be people are being ignored
I
and
mean,
what their
that's
quality
a,
of life's
yeah.
going to be. I just have another question about the greenhouses as of right on roofs of commercial buildings. Are they going to see that they're not going to be like the garages, so they'll collapse from the weight of these greenhouses? What kind of rules and regulations for a commercial building to put a greenhouse on their roof?
So those greenhouses would have to 100% comply with building code. Architects would have to file a full set of drawings to DOB showing that in order to get their building permits that they're passing their structural calculations, they're providing everything that building code requires for that enlargement. So that is, building code is authoritative there.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
And I want to just respond to your comment about the human beings and it's like God knows how these rules are going to work. And I don't think Nihilus is God, but I'm glad that Nihilus knows how they're going to work. And I did not realize, and I'm glad he clarified that the recycling is going to be in an enclosed building. So again, I know that there was a dog facility, say, on Main Street in Amboy. There was dogs outside. The dogs have to be in an enclosed facility. Sometimes there's bad actors. I know that I was at that community board meeting. Frank, Charlene, everybody sounded the alarm. We called DOB and the noise stopped. So in the future, if there is a bad actor, they're not in their enclosed building. It happens today. It might happen in the future, but that's why we call DOB. We have enforcement. I know that enforcement isn't always enforced as well as it should be, but I guess to clarify, so we're all on the same page, the recycling would be on a site that's less than 5,000 square feet. So a relatively standard small site. Yes, in a commercial overlay. It's not residential. It's a commercial overlay. And I know there's discussions on the philosophical understanding of what mixed use is. And maybe there shouldn't be mixed use in Staten Island or portions of Staten Island. But in a commercial overlay, it allows for barbershops, drugstores, grocery stores, bodegas, dance ballet, and potentially, maybe, if this proposal is adopted, a small recycling facility inside an enclosed building. So Vince, did you have something to say about battery storage?
Yeah, I do. I just really want to thank Nihilus and you, George, for this presentation. There's a ton of thought in this, and in broad strokes, the city has to move this way. Speaking on behalf of the borough president, what he's seeing in response to what Frank and Charlene and Jerry's saying is that he doesn't want to see these battery storage places within 200 feet of a residence. That's his position. But by and large, there's, great work going on, and that language will be introduced at the right time.
Thank you, Vince. I know that you've described this. The borough president is working on something to submit to myself, Nihilus, and Danielle. And yes, we acknowledge that it's beyond just aesthetics. It seems it's about maybe a larger buffer. So we'll have to review that and see how that buffer aligns with overlays and how close that is to residential districts. I know the one on Nelson, is it Nelson and Highland it's in a commercial overlay, but that commercial overlay is right next to a residence district. So we'll look for that feedback and submission. So thanks for that, Vince.
Thank you.
For the text.
Okay,
That
can
text.
we just take like one more question, because we do have another presentation. And we're going to actually continue for the board members. We're going to continue this discussion as we work on some language for a resolution and everything. So can we just kind of move this along and everything? Because we do still have the New York City Office of Cannabis Management that has been waiting very patiently. And then I have another meeting after this meeting. So can we just take like one more question and then, move forth, please?
Yes, no,
Charlene.
Thanks for reminding us.
Okay.
Frank, do you defer to Charlene?
Then I defer to Charlene. Go ahead, Charlene.
Okay,
Listen to you.
Charlene, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, Marie, taking up all your time.
No, that's okay. It's just like I
No,
said,
I just wanted to say to Nihilus and George, I know Board 3 has been a thorn in your side for the last couple of weeks regarding the city of Yes. You guys are really great. You explained everything. You put it to us in generic terms so that we thoroughly understand it. We truly appreciate it. However, this, if you want to call it a text amendment, whatever, needs really big modifications before this moves forward. And I just want to be reassured that all of our concerns will be taken into account before any action is taken on this.
We we'll field them in terms of the process. I'm not sure when they're incorporated at which moment.
I can speak to that.
Yeah, Nihilus, I think this is your wheelhouse.
Sure. Yeah. So first, Charlene, not a thorn in our sides. We're
Yes.
trying to do our job and you're trying to do your job. Totally understand. Everyone's trying to review the proposal and that's precisely what this process is for, to get this out there, have community members review it, provide feedback, and we take that back and inform the proposal. So that's exactly what we're doing here. When the board makes, whether when the Staten Island Borough Board or CB3 makes their resolution regarding the proposal, please, make detailed recommendations. We will get that. And there is going to be, so we hopefully we'll receive that, in early July. If not, that's fine. July 26th is the next chance for the city, really broadly speaking, to hear feedback on this proposal. July 26th is the City Planning Commission public hearing. So we will be here all night if we need to, hearing from folks and receiving verbal and written testimony. And all that's going to go into recommendations to the commission, which the department will be making, I'll be making, George will be making to the commission. Will be, their public meetings. We will say, we heard the following things from all of the various parties, all these various stakeholders and constituents saying, for example, don't let solar go above the peak of the roof. As a result, the department's recommending we add something to the zoning text to enact that change and prohibit solar above the peak of the roof. And then the commission will evaluate that and vote to decide whether to take that modification up, just as an example. So that's going to happen September 13th.
Okay. Thank you. Vince, do you have, I just want to make sure everything that you had on your mind was, said looking for the perspective of our office. Are you good?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, City Planning. We appreciate your very comprehensive presentation and also staying with us for so many questions and everything. Thank you.
Of
It
course.
was a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, without
giving us
any
the time.
further ado, I apologize. We're going to have the New York City Office of Cannabis Management discuss enforcement. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. We're actually the New York State Office of Cannabis
Oh.
Management. So we are the government agency that licenses dispensaries, and we do have a slide deck, but I also know that time is, we're already an hour and change into the meeting. So we can just verbally give you what we have and then send you the slide deck. We can come back another time. It's, what would you like to do?
How long are the slides?
We can do the slides. We can go through them quickly. We can do it in 5-8 minutes tops.
Okay, let's do that because you have so patiently waited, and you know what, this is an important issue for Staten Island as well. So go ahead, take it away.
Okay, Phil, can you just, do you have sharing?
Yep,
So
it looks like it.
Okay, while he's pulling it up, my name is Pascal Bernard. I'm Deputy Director of Intergovernmental Affairs here at the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. And Phil Rumsey is the Manager of Intergovernmental Outreach. And so we are tasked with talking to municipalities across the state. So Phil will run the slides very quickly and then we can take some answers. Some
Okay.
questions, I mean.
All right, I'll just jump in here.
Phil, just
Okay,
start
so-
with our new powers now.
Okay. Yeah, so originally when we started off here, we did not have power over, we only had power over licensed entities. So if we didn't give you a license, we had very little to no authority over you. In that atmosphere, we saw a lot of these illicit sticker shops popping up. We continued with our activities. We're working with local officials. We're identifying these illicit shops. and conducting large enforcement seizures when we were able to, and that usually meant they needed a license from us. We now have new enforcement powers. This will include our office, the New York State Office of Cannabis Management, New York State Department of Tax and Finance, and the Attorney General of the state of New York will be involved with this. Our powers are derived from the state fiscal year 2023-2024 budget, which was just recently passed. It empowers OCM to take enforcement actions against businesses selling cannabis without the required licenses. So these are the sticker shops that you've seen pop up throughout New York City, Long Island, and all throughout upstate. It does bolster our authority here at OCM. We can conduct regulatory inspections of any business selling or giving away cannabis, so they do not need a license anymore. And it allows for the inspection of these businesses through a court order if the business does not allow us to come in to conduct an inspection. It does allow us to seize cannabis from unlicensed entities, and there are civil penalties that can be assessed now as well. So a basic overview, there's a new Class A misdemeanor for individuals selling cannabis or cannabis products. It allows New York State Department of Tax and Finance to conduct regulatory inspections of businesses if the appropriate taxes have not been paid, and establishes a new tax fraud crime when cannabis businesses willfully fails to collect the correct taxes. So closure of these illicit stores. So we do have the right to revoke, cancel, or suspend any license that we give out, and we've had that since day one. This new power, the new powers that we have, allows OCM to conduct regulatory inspections during normal business hours, including vehicles associated with that business if they're engaged in selling any product under our purview. And this includes everything: medical cannabis, adult use cannabis, cannabis products, cannabinoid products that have no THC, and hemp extract that has no THC. So we now have a broad umbrella to crack down on these stores. Additionally, any product marketed or labeled as cannabis will now fall under our direct purview. It does allow us to seek a court ordered injunctions, closing stores, and removal of commercial tenants to ensure that the operations stop. This can incentivize landlords to make sure they are acting in compliance. Some may be aware that this is going on, others may not, and we are taking steps to make sure they understand it before we take these steps. If the owner fails to comply, they may face up to 3 times the amount of rent which was charged during the violation, and the property owner can also be held liable for legal costs once we prove that they have been ignoring us. Enforcement powers will proceed in a very orderly manner. You can see that providing word to the landlords on the front end is necessary. We can move to inspect and seize illicit shops. We can place stickers on the entrances immediately, closing them down, and giving store operators and owners a hearing date on the spot, as well as cease and desist order. This will go to our new administrative law judge hearing, and the hearings can happen within 3 to 4 business days. Some financial penalties. So it adds penalties for people who are cultivates for sale or sells cannabis product, medical, that is marketed or labeled without having the appropriate registration, license, or permit. Violators would be subject to a penalty of not more than $10,000 a day during the violation period. It will add additional civil penalties in the amount of no more than 5 times the revenue from the prohibited sales. And here's a kind of an overview breakdown of the different layers that will be created. If there's more than 5 pounds, we're getting into $25,000 for first violations, $50,000 for the second. You can see in the last one, if there are more than 5 pounds of illicit or more than 1 pound, we're getting into $50,000 for the first violation and $100,000 for the second violation. Some of the civil penalties I had mentioned, OCM will have the ability to revoke a sales tax certificate of authority once they have established that they are selling this. That will stop them from selling a stick of gum or a can of Coke. New York State can revoke a registration for possession of illicit cannabis as well. OCM reporting. So we're going to be going out here in force, enforcing these, working with our other state bureaucracies to implement this. And our feet will be held to the fire beginning January 1st of next year. OCM will have to submit a report on what we've been doing and the success of our activities to the state legislature. OCM will be reporting this on our website, and it will include enforcement actions from the Office of Cannabis Management and Tax and Finance as well. Additionally, we're going to be continuing some of our previous activities. This sticker you see, it's about 12, 13 inches tall, and it goes on every legal dispensary. So if you go to a store and you're not sure, you can use your phone, scan the QR code, and it will tell you whether or not this is a legal dispensary. We have been reliant on citizens and elected officials to make sure that we know where these stores are and what's happening in your municipalities. So you can use the email, or you can use this incident report that we have on our website. And as much information as you can provide will allow us to start the process. This is a very specific and process that we have to follow. Sending out cease and desist letters to establish that they know what they're doing is wrong, reaching out to them, speaking with them, and making sure that they are fully aware of the repercussions is the beginning of our process. So it is important for us to know where you're seeing these stores so we can begin that legal process. Next steps for OCM, we are finalizing a lot of these things, finalizing inventory forms, really basic bureaucratic things here, creating and printing the closure stickers, and making sure that standard operating procedures are updated, finalized, and are within the language of the bill. We have accomplished many of these actions, and I think in the next few days, you will be hearing additional information on the steps that we are taking to tackle this. So with that, I will stop and open it up for questions.
Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you, Pascal and Phil, for this presentation. I just wonder, from the perspective of land use, is this treated as retail, which would be use group 6? There's a medical component which is allowed in residential zones. Do you have a determination of what areas this type of use is permitted in?
It is retail.
Yeah.
So the dispensaries are retail, and so they should be in that area as any other retail business. It should not be treated differently than, a liquor store or any other, again, kind of retail, a bookstore or what have you. The only thing is we do have the sensitive use areas. And so that is 200 feet from a house of worship, 500 feet from a school. And that is if it is exclusively used as a house of worship and a school. For example, if you have a high school and on the ground level, there is an IHOP that mitigates it. So the 500-foot rule does not apply. So it's very similar to SLA in that way. Additionally, if the school is on I'm making this up, 42nd Street between Broadway and like 8th. And then the dispensary is on 43rd Street. Even if it's 500 feet, it's not on the same block, so it negates that. We do have a more comprehensive presentation really about the MRTA and everything that is within the law. We'd be happy to come back and present that at a later date for you so that you really have a full understanding of, you know, what the MRTA is and what the role of the community board specifically are as it relates to that.
Okay, if I may, Pascal, just to follow up on that. I have heard, as has everybody, about medical use marijuana. Is that allowed to be dispensed by a doctor or anybody in the medical profession? Or is the dispensary in New York State only within these certified, sanctioned?
So there are two kinds of dispensaries. There are medical dispensaries, and for that you do need a prescription, and you need to be enrolled in our medical program. And then there's the other dispensaries, which are the adult use, they're recreational dispensaries. And so currently, there are 9 licenses for the MRTA, but we have a separate licensing system, which are the conditional systems. So there are 3 licenses for those. And so the conditional adult retail dispensaries, those are the only dispensaries that anybody has licenses for in New York State.
All right, so just to summarize, and I'm sorry to take the time, but at the end of the day, there are medical facilities that legally can dispense marijuana, and there are retail uses, retail establishments.
Yes, there are medical dispensaries, and there have been medical dispensaries in the state for a number of years. And the retail dispensaries are relatively new since the passage of the MRTA in 2021.
Thank you very much.
Just one additional point too, we've, the medical dispensaries are owned by, multi-state operators. They're the very large, companies. They operate them because they were the only ones who were really capable of doing it years and years ago. We have stopped issuing medical, dispensary, licenses at the moment, to help build the industry and, you know, focus on some social equity candidates as well. So we're not giving out new ones, just for context here, for a little while.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question?
I have a question. It's a little off topic, but the community board had a dispensary come to us. They gave an excellent presentation. They had a site that they leased. And then I read in the newspaper somewhere, there's another mechanism that lease, they have to go to some other place to find out if, to get a lease. Am I explaining myself?
So the way that we are set up, the Office of Cannabis Management, we are the only licensing agency for, in the state for licenses for anything related to recreational cannabis, hemp, medical cannabis. And so we, in addition to that, we have a board, the Cannabis Control Board. It is a 5-member board, and the head of the Dormitory Authority for the State of New York, DASNY, sits on that board. And there, as Phil said, we have, you know, we've stopped providing licenses for the medical program because we're concentrating on the recreational use. And so the CARD, Conditional Adult Retail Dispensary Program, those are the first recreational use licenses that we've issued. And one of the ways to help jumpstart the industry was to create this conditional system. And there was a fund that was created. That fund is administered through DASNY. And people are able to either bring their own location, licensees can bring their own location, which is the case that you're talking about. But simultaneously, DASNY has been looking for locations because they would be the ones to sign the lease, and then the licensee would, sign an agreement with them. And so Daphne was also looking for locations through a real estate agency. And so what happened in this specific case is Dasney and the licensee that you're talking about both found the same location. And so Dasney now is the entity that leased the location. And so there will be a licensee in that location. And so there will be a licensee, and that person may or may not be from Staten Island. We don't know because we haven't matched that location with the licensee as of yet. I know this is a little confusing. Again, we do have a full presentation that we do that really explains everything in greater depth, and we're happy to come back, or we can come to your specific community board and do it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Frank, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring out, Jerry, I think what you're talking about is the one that came in front of us. They did not require community board approval. In other words, they did not come in front of, they're just making a presentation, that's it. Whether we liked it or not, we were getting it. You know what I'm saying?
No, but I wasn't questioning that. I was just talking about.
No, but I think that's in other words, they went through a totally different process.
So to clarify, municipalities have jurisdiction over time, place, and manner. Community boards in New York City, because of the density, community boards represent the municipality. And the municipalities provide an advisory opinion to OCM. And that advisory opinion becomes part of the record and what the Cannabis Control Board considers when issuing licenses. So it's, again, similar to SLA in that it is an advisory opinion, but it is part of the record.
Right, but the community board did not have an advisory opinion in this particular case. We were not given the opportunity to have an advisory opinion. That's my point.
Well, so the licensee that came before you that met with the community board, you guys did vote on that, right?
No, we didn't.
Oh, you
No,
did?
there was nothing to vote on.
Okay.
There was nothing to vote on.
They were approved by the state. They come to us.
Yes,
We've been
but
approved. Right, they're just coming to explain, we've been approved by the state, and we're just coming out of courtesy and respect to the community to discuss it with you and tell you what we are, who we are, and what we plan on doing. But the state already authorized them to come into existence.
so we provisionally licensed them, yes, but they still have to come before the local municipality, and the local municipality still has an opportunity to issue an advisory opinion to OCM. Excuse me, my allergies.
Okay. Charlene? Muted.
I think you're muted.
You're muted, Charlene.
Charlene, unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think what Jerry was trying to say is we had a presentation for a specific owner. He was from the community. He was doing everything that he was supposed to do. He seemed to be an appropriate fit for the community for opening up this type of cannabis retail. Okay. So he had already spoken to the people about the lease. Now cannabis office is coming in and saying, whichever part of it is, that they will do the lease and not the specific owner of this retail space. Where the community board is concerned about this is the board was very pleased with the applicant, but now what you are saying is that because you are going to sign the lease, it could be anybody put in there. It doesn't have to be the person that we recommend, the person that we've already had a presentation from. Doesn't have to be from this borough, doesn't have to be from the community. And I think that's where our board would have objections, because we have already taken this so far down the road, spoken to the owner, our electeds have spoken to the owner. Everything seems to be in good working order, and now all of a sudden, a wrench was thrown into the gear where you are going to sign the lease, and now anyone can be put in there. We may not like the person that you choose.
So, to be clear, we only license applicants. It is DASNY, the Dormitory Authority for the State of New York, that is signing the lease through the fund. So that we don't have, to speak in metaphors, that's not the car we're driving, right? We're only driving here is your license car. DASNY is driving that other car. Having said that, once, there is a location, we then match a licensee to the location. And so there is a chance that it could be that licensee. There's a chance that it may not be that licensee. We don't know for certain because the matching hasn't happened. Now, how does the matching happen? People applied for a license with us, and there were certain criteria that they had to meet, and then they were scored. One of the ways that we know where people want to be is we broke up the state into regions, like the state economic development regions. And so here in New York City, each of the borough is its own region. And so for someone to be matched in Staten Island, they had to have asked for Staten Island, for their license to be based in Staten Island. And so anybody that we match with that location would have made the request that that their license be issued for Staten Island, for that region. And so, again, the people, the licensee that we match with that location, they may be from Staten Island, they may not be from Staten Island. The matching hasn't happened yet. And I know that's a little disconcerting, because what you're saying, I watch a lot of HGTV, so bear with me. What you're saying is you did House Hunters and you walked into the house and you already mentally moved in. And now someone's like, no, you've been outbidded. And you're like, what? But I like this house. I could see myself raising my family in this house. And that's really what's happened. You met with the licensee, you like this licensee, you're like, I can see you in our community. And I fully understand that. And we will take this back and we will share your feedback. I will say that I can't remember, someone from CB3 did email me, and then we talked on the phone. And so I am well aware of how you're feeling, but I will again reiterate that, this licensee, you guys feel very passionate about him or, them, and that, you feel that this licensee is a good fit. I don't know what that will do, but I will definitely communicate it.
Okay, but just for clarity, yes, it was my office. You spoke to Stacy, and I just
Yes.
wanted to make sure that it is getting back to DASNY.
Yes.
Okay, because we really don't want somebody from another borough benefiting from our borough. We would prefer to have somebody from our borough, ideally somebody from that community who knows the community. So that's where the board stands on this. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it. We don't meet over the summer, so maybe, either the boards usually don't meet over the summer either. So either, if they want to do something sooner, they will reach out to you, or maybe we could discuss coming back in September, for the fuller presentation and everything. Thank you, and I also appreciate your patience. I know you had to wait a long time with the city planning
No, it's
issue.
fine. It's our pleasure. And then tomorrow we will send the slide deck that Phil that Phil went over. We'll send it to the Borough President's office along with some other materials specifically dealing with the enforcement piece.
Thank you.
That's great,
Thank you
Pascal.
so
Thank you very
much.
much.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You too. Okay, so let's move it along and just finish wrapping up this meeting. We did not have any correspondence. Does anybody have any old business to bring up? Okay, does anybody have any new business to bring up?
Marie, I have a question.
Go ahead.
City of Yes,
Yes.
is it possible to meet with somebody from Borough Hall to go over specifics on this?
We are going to, so we're working on some language right now for a resolution that we're going to share with the members, and we are going to have a follow-up meeting just with the members of the board. So we are going to be doing something shortly.
Okay, we have their full presentation at our land use next week.
Right.
Okay.
So do you want us to send our concerns and recommendations, although I know you heard them today, to your office?
You can.
Okay,
That would be great, Charlene, if you could
Okay.
include
Yes.
Vince as well, please.
thank you.
Okay. Anybody else for new business? Okay, thank you. I don't know if we're gonna have something come up over the summer, so I may or may not be seeing you over the summer. Enjoy your summer. If I do not, actually, I will see you all at your board meetings, but then after that, we may or may not see each other. Can I entertain a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Jerry first. Can I have a second on the motion?
Thank you,
Fred,
Fred.
second.
This is the
Thanks.
longest meeting I can ever remember.
This is definitely one of them. We had one a few years ago. It was the budget consultations, and then a few agencies had some deadlines. That one went about a little bit more than 3 hours, but this is running within the top 3, I think.
Well, the city of yes is a big issue. That's why.
Yes, of course, of course. It was definitely an important issue.
Thank you,
All right.
Marie. Thank you.
Thank you,
Brooke.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
You bet, guys. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Have a good
Good
night.
night, all.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.